Lou Lamoriello will address the media on Friday, but what will he say? Plus, we know this roster needs changes, but who's the most likely to be moved? We'll break all of that down and a lot more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go, now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We have got a lot to discuss on today's show. But first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you could send us an email to lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we are happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You could also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles. You can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date with all things Islanders throughout the offseason. And it's also great to talk Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. So it has been announced that both Patrick Roy and Lou Lamoriello will be addressing the media on Friday as the players clean out their lockers and head home for what is obviously going to be too long of an off season. And to be honest, if you think about it, this is different from what happened a year ago. Last year, Lou Lamoriello did not address the media until I believe it was around June 6th, even though the team cleaned out their lockers on May 1st. So that delay led to all kinds of speculation. And then, of course, Lou Lamoriello returned and continued to run the team. What will Lou say on Friday as far as everything is concerned with his future, with the team's future? I can tell you already some of the things that we are likely to hear from Lou Lamoriello. Assuming that he's staying, I know we're going to hear, I believe in this core. I am committed to winning now. And that basically his intention is to keep this group together. And then he'll say something like, yes, if we can add talent, whether it's a puck-moving defenseman or whether it's a goal scorer, he'll try everything he can do to do that. But, obviously, there are obstacles. And I get the feeling that if Lou is staying on as GM, that's what we're going to hear from, from Lou Lamoriello. And, it's one of those things where Lou Lamoriello doesn't address the media often. He is, and when he does, he tends not to say a lot. He'll speak in generalities. He'll talk about what ideally he would like to do without really discussing how realistic any of those options are. And I think part of the problem for Islanders fans is that while it has been, 2 years now, I mean, you got to go back to the trade deadline of 2023, where Lou Lamoriello was saying, yeah, we could really use a puck-moving defenseman. And then you go back to the offseason last year, and Lou Lamoriello was basically saying, yeah, we could use a puck-moving defenseman, and we can use some more goal scoring and offensive firepower. And yet neither one of those things came to fruition. Now, we know Lou will be asked about a lot of other things. The team has a long list of potential free agents and everydayers. You know, we spoke about some of those uh, in the last couple of shows. And if you haven't had a chance to catch it, you can go back and listen to that. But obviously, I think Matt Martin and Cal Clutterbuck will be sort of at the top of the list as far as reporters are concerned. Some may be asking about Ruslan Ishkakov. That's another possibility. Will he be staying with the Islanders and re-signing, or will he head back to the KHL and Russia? That is a distinct possibility for him, depending on whether or not Lou Lamoriello is saying to him that he'll have a realistic chance to make the big club this year. And, you know, it's one of those things where if I'm Ishkakov, I don't know what I would do. My inclination would be to either head back to Russia or to demand a trade off this roster onto a different NHL team. Because, quite honestly, the way this Islanders team handles their younger players and the way they've handled him, I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for Ishkakov to stay on this roster. Because, look, he played 2 games with the big club. That certainly did whet his appetite a bit. But, you know, playing 2 games, one was a meaningless regular season finale that had no impact whatsoever on the Islanders' playoff situation, whether they'd make it, what their seed would be. And then the other was a playoff game in which Matt Martin was injured. The game went to double overtime. It was over 81 minutes worth of hockey, and yet Ishkakov was on the ice for 6 minutes, give or take. That doesn't show a lot of faith on the part of Patrick Roy and by extension on the part of Lou Lamoriello to really, you know, not a lot of faith in what Ishkakov can add to the roster right now. And, you know, with his lack of size and the Islanders' emphasis on what players do away from the puck, I just don't know if this is a good fit to keep him on the roster. Now, should they keep him on the roster? Should they re-sign him? To me, the answer is yes, if and only if they're actually going to give him an opportunity to play. I don't think there is a lot more that he can do at the AHL level. And, you know, the thing about this Islanders organization under Lou Lamoriello, they do not seem to have a lot of faith in younger players. That was true when Barry Trotz was the coach. It was true when Lane Lambert was the coach. And it has seemingly been true under Patrick Roy. They don't seem to have a lot of faith in the kids. But at the same time, they don't do a great job of developing them because there you get to the point where there's only so much you can learn at the AHL level. And a lot of the time with younger kids, you need to let them play and make their share of mistakes in the NHL in order for them to grow and learn. You know, you ask any parent, or if you look back as an adult at your life as a child, you learn by making mistakes. And then you realize, hey, you know, when I touched that hot stove, that hurt. That wasn't a good idea. I'm not going to touch a hot stove again. And, you know, the NHL game is faster and more physical than the AHL game. And the only way to truly adjust to playing against bigger, stronger, faster, and more skilled players at the NHL level is to play games against them and figure out, hey, I can do this. I could do this other thing in juniors or in the AHL, but I can't do it consistently in the NHL. So I'm not going to try this move very often. So, but this team, when they have a young player, and we saw it with Oliver Wahlstrom, and we saw it with Ishkakov, and we saw it with Simon Holmstrom early on in his career. And, they just don't seem to give their kids a lot of opportunities. And when they do get an opportunity to play, they tend to be one mistake and you sit on the bench and you don't play the rest of the game or the rest of the period, and you don't get a lot of minutes. And part of the problem with that is that the Islanders remain in the messy middle. They barely squeaked into the playoffs the last 2 seasons, clinching a playoff berth in game 81 out of 82 games. When you don't have a margin for error to make the playoffs, you can't afford to let those young players make a lot of mistakes because you're not good enough to overcome them. But that stunts the growth of your young players, and then you get into this negative cycle where the team is getting older. You don't have any reinforcements because you've either traded them away, you've not developed them properly and never let them learn, and then the team gets older, and then you have to make more desperation trades, and it becomes a vicious negative cycle where you're chasing your tail to stay in 8th place. So we're going to see what Lou Lamoriello has to say. I assume we'll find out whether or not he'll be back, and knowing Lou, he wants to be back. But we'll talk about why it's time to break up this core group and make changes on this roster. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about which players they might be able to move. And we have our Islanders birthday of the day, a goalie better known as a Philadelphia Flyer who spent one rather up and down season on the island. We've got that and a whole lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And look, Islander fans, you can use your knowledge of the NHL to look at all the great odds and bets on playoff hockey, from player props to who's going to win the series to who's going to win the Stanley Cup. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, look, let's get down to brass tacks, okay? I feel that it is very, very clear that it is time to break up this Islanders core group. And I think the reason is fairly obvious. You go up and down this roster. This group, the core of this group, and yeah, there have been some changes over the last few years. Bo Horvat has been added and Simon Holmstrom has taken over as a full-time player. But for the most part, this core has remained intact. And yet, in the last 3 years, they have missed the playoffs once and been eliminated in the first round twice. And even on those couple of years that the Islanders went on long playoff runs and reached the conference final, they barely squeaked into the playoffs those years as well. In fact, in the bubble year, they wouldn't have even made the playoffs. Now, obviously, the season would have been completed, so they would have had a chance to make the playoffs. But if the season ended right then and there, had the NHL not extended the number of teams that made the playoffs that bubble year, there is no way that, the Islanders would have been on the outside looking in. You look at the age of a lot of the players on this team. Over 30, Anders Lee, Brock Nelson, J.G. Pajot, Kyle Palmieri, Casey Cizikas, Cal Clutterbuck, Matt Martin. Those guys are now, Martin and Clutterbuck are scheduled to be free agents. We don't know if they'll be back. Ryan Pollock and Adam Pelech closing in on 30. Mike Riley is now on the wrong side of 30. Robert Bortuzzo over 30. Now, Riley and Bortuzzo also going to be free agents. Obviously, Semyon Varlamov, well over the age of 30. So you look at this roster. Clearly, the Islanders, as we've said, are in the messy middle. And, that is the worst place for an NHL team to be. And you don't want to be in the messy middle. That means that you're not good enough to be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender, but you're too good to get a really good draft pick and therefore to really improve your team. You're not getting a Connor Bedard or, the next Sidney Crosby. You're not getting those elite once-in-a-generation talents when you're drafting, 15th or 13th or 17th. That is not going to happen. So I think the key question becomes, from an Islanders perspective, how do you fix this? And Lou Lamoriello, who put this team together, I think this core has maxed out. That unless you make fundamental changes, and it doesn't have to be tearing the whole thing down, but unless you trade away some of your core players and free up some cap space, because the Islanders are not going to have a lot of it coming into this offseason, unless you free up some cap space and add players who can help you get younger, faster, and more skilled, you are not going to get any better this year than you were last year. And that is a serious problem for the New York Islanders, because let's face it, as this core ages, and they are going to continue to get older, if anything, you're going to get less from these players. How many more 30-goal seasons does Kyle Palmieri have in him? How many more, times can we expect Brock Nelson and Anders Lee? The odds are not good that these guys will have better seasons than they did this year. The odds are they will start to slow down, if anything. And clearly, you don't want to be in the messy middle. And I think the fundamental flaw, look, I respect Lou Lamoriello. He's in the Hall of Fame, deservedly so. He has the Stanley Cup rings to prove his past success, even if it did happen many years ago. But I think the thing is that Lou Lamoriello's theory that all you need to do is make the playoffs and then you've got a chance to win the Stanley Cup, while technically true, it is not the best way to build a franchise. And right now, the Islanders are chasing their tail to try to sneak in as the 7th or 8th best team in the Eastern Conference, and then hope to get hot at the right time and essentially pull off 4 consecutive series upsets to win a Stanley Cup. And while that could happen, we've seen it happen, it is not likely, and it doesn't make your odds good that this is going to happen, A, often, and B, it just is such a long shot. I mean, even look at this. A year ago, the Florida Panthers were the last team to make the playoffs. They went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. They were better than their record, but they didn't win the Stanley Cup. Now, they went on this great run, but again, to make that happen, you want to win, you have to put forth a team that is a contender. And even that doesn't guarantee it. Look at the Carolina Hurricanes, who clearly are a better team on paper than the New York Islanders, top to bottom. They haven't won a Stanley Cup with this group. The New York Rangers have not won a Stanley Cup with this group. The Maple Leafs, the Oilers, these are all teams with more talent than the New York Islanders, but they haven't won a Stanley Cup. But they have better odds and better chances than the Isles, because chasing 8th place and hoping to get hot at the right time, it's better than, not making the playoffs as far as your odds of winning a Stanley Cup, but it is not the way to build a team to be a consistent winner. You want to put together a team that is in the top 3 or 4 teams in your conference. You want home ice advantage. You want to face weaker opponents early on in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And you want to be a team that other teams fear to play. The Islanders, when they were reaching the conference final those 2 years, were a team that nobody wanted to play. And even though they weren't as talented as those other teams that they ended up beating in the playoffs, they were a pain in the rear end to play against. They had an identity, and that identity was, we wear you down, we play sound positional defense, we forecheck aggressively, we cash in on your mistakes that we force you to make, we tire you out, and we outlast you in a 7-game series. And that was effective, but that's not what this team is anymore. The only identity that the New York Islanders have right now as a team is they are really, really inconsistent. And that is not an identity that you want to have as a team. And it just underlines the fact that this group right now, as it is presently put together, is not good enough to be a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. So it's time to break up this group. We have got more to discuss on today's show. We'll talk about how they can break up the group a little bit without tearing the thing down top to bottom, plus some of the players that they may want to move. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you could trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Part of the problem right now with the way this team has been put together, in addition to their age, in addition to the bad contracts that a lot of these players have, is that they just don't have a lot of cap room. And to get better, they need more cap space because, as we discussed, they need 2 more top 6 forwards to add some offensive juice. They need a puck-moving defenseman. They need to get fast, younger. and more skilled. And if you add all of the players on this roster who are still going to be here, even with the rise in the cap, the Islanders are really only going to have about $6 million in available cap space, and that's before they would re-sign guys like Kyle McLean and Mike Riley if he comes back, or Ishkakov. So there clearly are issues here that need to be ironed out. But let's face it, right now, they need to move some of these players. And my problem with Lou Lamoriello, if ownership chooses to retain him, my problem with Lou is I don't think he's willing to make those necessary moves. He is not willing or able to admit that this group that he put together has maxed out its potential, and that unless he moves on from some guys, it just isn't going to work. To me, if you look at it, the two most logical guys on this team to move on from would be J.G. Pageau and Brock Nelson. And it's for two different reasons. I'd add a third in Anders Lee, but we'll get to it. J.G. Pageau is making $5 million a year as a third line center. Offensively, he did not give you much the last few years. And this year, 11 goals, 33 points, a -8 while playing in all 82 games. He is also one of your better penalty killers, but your penalty kill was last in the league. And, as the old joke, Ralph Kiner was playing for the Pittsburgh Pirates and, led the league in home runs, went in to negotiate a new contract, wanted a raise. The GM asked him, where did we finish in the standings last year? Well, we finished last. Well, Ralph, we could finish last without you. Same thing with J.G. Pageau. The penalty kill was the worst in the league. Can only get better, really. And they could finish last without J.G. Pageau. The addition of Kyle McLean makes Pageau expendable as the third line center. And if you could free up that $5 million cap hit, so much the better. Anders Lee, I know he's your captain. Clearly, he's slowing down, both on the ice and production-wise. Yeah, he had a pretty good playoff. He was one of their better players in the playoffs. But 5 games doesn't erase 82 games of struggles. To me, you can buy out the last year of Anders Lee's contract or try to trade him and retain some salary to free up some cap space. That would make sense to me, even though I know Lou Lamoriello would be very reluctant to do it. And I would be, look, it wouldn't be easy. I like Anders Lee as a person and as a player. But again, the adage in sports, it's always better to get rid of a player a year too soon than a year too late. And that thought is why I put Brock Nelson on this list. Nelson is getting up there in years. He's entering his mid-30s, and while he's playing his best hockey in his last few years, the market for Brock Nelson will never be higher than it is this off season. And you could probably you could free up $6 million in cap space by moving on from Brock Nelson. You probably wouldn't have to retain salary, and you have enough centers on this roster right now, and you might even be able to get a good player, a top 6 forward in return, and maybe even a pick as well, depending on the circumstances. So those are the 3 I think you can move on from most easily. There are others, and we'll be talking about it throughout the offseason. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. I know this guy is not going to be a fan favorite, but today is the 60th birthday of former Islanders goalie Ron Hextall. 6th-round pick of the Flyers back in 1982. made his NHL debut with Philadelphia in 86-87, played 1 year with the Quebec Nordique, 1 year with the Islanders, and then finished his career again in Philadelphia. Had a 308 goals against and an 898 save percentage in 65 games with the Islanders in 93-94, 27, 26, and 6. But boy, did he struggle in that playoff series against that other New York team that we're not going to mention. So, yeah, there was that. One of his better games as an Islander, November 17th, 1993, Islanders visiting Ottawa to take on the Senators. Ron Hextall, the goalie for the Islanders. Craig Billington gets the start for the Senators, and the Islanders just crush Ottawa, even though they were outshot 37-28 in this game. Pierre Turgeon had a hat trick and an assist, but Ron Hextall made 36 saves in 37 shots for a .973 save percentage as the Islanders beat the Senators 8-1. Hextall, of course, went on to be in the front office in the NHL, where he still is today. So he's still active in hockey. But again, Ron Hextall, one difficult season on Long Island. He is our Islanders birthday of the day. Thanks again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Everydayers will be back Monday at our regular time. We will talk about some of the things that Lou Lamoriello said. Now, if there's very big news, we will do a special episode. So if Lou is stepping down or if there is some major announcement, we'll do our short video on YouTube, and we'll certainly look into doing a special episode. So watch the Twitter feed and we'll keep you up to date. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.